Okay, my clock shows 5:30, so we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone tonight to our monthly committee meeting where we review next month's regular business topics, items for approval. Just a quick note that Director Smith is unlikely to join us tonight. She had a conflict, but we will go ahead and get started with roll call. So I will start with Director Barrows.
Here.
And Director Decker.
Here.
And Director Zavala.
Here.
And I'm also here, so we do have quorum, not that we are taking action tonight. I'm going to turn this over to Kathy and her team to review the contracts, policy, and teaching and learning.
Thank you, Director Sproul. First up, we have our Chief Operating Officer, Brett Bleckschmidt. He has 12 contracts he will be reviewing with the board tonight.
All right. Thanks, Kathy and Kyle. Just diving right in. I know we got a big agenda, so I'll go quickly, but by all means, slow me down and stop me if we have questions. First item on the agenda is a recommendation to approve an intergovernmental purchasing agreement number 2021-037 with Issaquah School District. I'm sure you remember we have these periodically where other people want to piggyback on our pricing or our bids that we've competitively administered. So we generally grant that access in the spirit of cooperation. Any questions? All right. Next item is recommendation to renew the educational agreement between Vancouver and Maxim Healthcare Services. These are contract providers for primarily healthcare type positions like RNs, LPNs, board certified behavior analysts, registered behavior technicians, paraprofessionals. There's a range of compensation depending on the level of the position that we're contracting. Again, this is something we've done for years. It meets the need that we can't fill internally through our own employees, which is always our priority. So it's our recommendation that you would consider approving the agreement between the district and Maxim Healthcare Services for those professional services in the amount of approximately, in the approximate amount of $250,000 for the next school year. No questions on that. We'll move on to recommendation to award bid number 2021-027 for the 6th classroom addition at Columbia River High School, which will also have some concession area and some mechanical space. By way, this is going to be called the 800 wing of the school. Just to backtrack all the way into our deliberations and conversations, this is the piece that was going to originally be built where the black box sits now. So this is the classrooms that will preserve the black box. And so since we had to go outside of the current structure, we'll also be able to provide some other amenities. The cost of this bid recommendation is, and again, it goes to Robertson and Olson Construction, which is nice because they're the contractor that's doing the rest of the work at Columbia River. We were fearful when we had to go out to bid that there could be that kind of, not necessarily conflict between the contractors, but conflict for space and timing and access. So it's nice that it's one contractor. Our recommendation is that we move forward with the bid to Robertson and Olson Construction in the amount of $5,485,000 plus Washington sales tax. Right, be anxious to get that project going, or that part of the project going. Moving on to recommendation to approve purchase agreement number 2021-039 with NORPAC Seating of Enumclaw, Washington. These are the stadium bleachers on the visitor side at Columbia River High School's located stadium. So it's our recommendation that we approve the contract with NORPAC Seating through the KCDA cooperative pricing in the amount of $138,290 plus Washington sales tax. Right, hearing no questions, we'll move on to recommendation to award bid number 2021-029. This is for phase 2 of the Kiggins Bowl project, which includes a track for Discovery Middle School on that site, as well as some bleachers on the visitor side, and some fencing, ADA, parking lot improvements, and retaining walls. Colf Construction was the low bidder on that, and so it's our recommendation that you award bid number 2021-029 to Colf Construction in the amount of $1,294,800 plus Washington sales tax. All right, moving on, we have a recommendation to approve agreement number 2021-041 between the district and Entrance Controls Integrated Security. This is for our standard setup of security cameras and access pads at Ruth Bader Ginsburg Elementary. So again, this would be funded with the bond program, as all expenses at that site will be. Our recommendation is that we approve the agreement with Entrance Control Integrated Security in the amount of $213,202.74 plus Washington sales tax. All right, moving on to recommendation to approve purchase agreement number 2021-043. This is for furniture and equipment at the Heights campus, which will house the programs formerly known as leaser programs. Our recommendation is that we award this purchase agreement in the amount of $950,000 plus Washington sales tax to School Specialties to provide those furniture and equipment needs and installation. Right, have another secure entrance and FCR. I guess it's not the first one this month, but you've seen these on other projects before. We have completed the work, or the contractor has completed the secure entrance and FCRC upgrade project at Roosevelt Elementary School. So it's our recommendation that you approve the project, and I guess we call it accept the bid number 2020-076 in the amount of $124,970.07 plus Washington sales tax, less retainage that will be held until we get the go-ahead from the state agencies to release that. This triggers that process by way of reminder. So we're satisfied with the work, and so we're seeking to accept the project. All right, moving on. We will have a recommendation next board meeting to accept purchase agreement number 2020-079, the gym bleachers removal and installation at Jason Lee Middle School. And again, this is work that's been completed and inspected by our staff to our satisfaction. So this would launch the release of the retainage process. But the cost to date to accomplish the work that is satisfactory is $135,640 plus Washington state sales tax. Again, I don't know that I mentioned that's NORPAC seeding project as well. All right, and another exciting closeout of a project. These things lag on a little bit long, as you'll notice from the name of the project here, but we're finally ready to accept and begin the final closeout of the Peter S. Ogden Elementary Replacement Project. That was bid number 2018-027. So Robinson Construction Company has completed all of our final expectations on that. So we're recommending that you accept the project in the amount of $32,342,859.68 plus Washington sales tax, less retainage, which will again be held until the process is completed with state agencies. right, another Peter S. Ogden Elementary. This is the building commissioning report that needs to be formally accepted by the board. So it'll be our request that that building commissioning report be formally accepted to satisfy the OSPI process for the state match, which is kind of represented as the D forms in state documents. Hearing no questions on that, we're down to our last one, and that is the recommendation to approve purchasing agreement number 2021-044. This is part of that infrastructure upgrade that we've had previous conversations and other recommendations on. This portion of the project is for the Microsoft 365 A3 suite of software. So we are excited to retire some of the GroupWise and some of the other systems that we're operating under now and move into this environment, but it'll require a purchase agreement with OETC in the amount of $211,534.08 plus Washington sales tax. And as I look at the recommendation, I see that there's a period where there should be a comma after the 211,000. So we'll make sure that's corrected by the final agenda next meeting. Any questions on that? All right, well then I'll turn it back over to Kathy or Kyle. I can't remember who takes it from here.
Well, Kathy does. I want to thank you for going through a long list, and apologize we didn't have questions. You provided a lot of good detail for us. So
no apology necessary. Like to keep it moving. If you don't have questions, no problem.
So next up is policy, although we have no policy items for the board to review at this workshop, so we will move on to our teaching and learning. And I have with us tonight the Director of Curriculum and Instruction, Darcy Frank, our Director of Career and Technical Ed, Mark Reith, and our Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, Jim Gray. And I'm going to turn it over to Darcy. So Darcy, you lead the way.
Thanks, Kathy. Good evening. It looks like the recommendation to adopt Resolution 879, Improving Vancouver Schools Career and Technical Education Plan. And Mark is here to talk about that. So that's the first thing on the list.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm assuming you got this ahead of time, so I just wanted to hit some highlights and be available for some questions. As you may or may not know, it is an annual requirement and it's tied to RCW 28A-700.010. I guess it's a law that CTE programs need to give an update to the board and tell them of our plans and get approval and recommendations annually to make sure that you're aware of what's happening in the CTE world and that we're on target and that we have a process in place. So that's part of what this is. And Darcy also mentioned part of that is Resolution 879. Which is an annual renewal of that, to say that I did bring this forward to the board, that you did do a review, and I was able to answer any questions and any follow-up that you might need. So as part of the process, per OSPI, we have to do a 5-year comprehensive plan that we look at and we evaluate every year. And as part of that, there's actually a 14-category quality program review that we do on an annual basis. And we have our teachers do a self-evaluation. We have our local program advisories do that same evaluation. We compile all that data, and then we do program level goals that we support at the program and building level. But then as a district, we take all of that data, compile it, and come up with averages and look for opportunities that we can focus some goals on. So for brevity's sake, I think instead of a comprehensive report, at this point, we just kind of hit the highlights, and then we elevate the goals that we have that are main priorities for the year. Usually, and this year was a little different, in the October timeframe, we do a comprehensive report where we talk about kind of credits earned, dual credit earned, when we have all that data and are able to compile it over the summer. So I would hope that we get the opportunity to do a more comprehensive report with more detail next fall when we come back, and we can present that to you, because we have a lot of things that we like to brag about in the CTE world. So again, I won't belabor this because I know that you've had a chance to review this, but some of the big work is highlights. even in this COVID world that we have, we're really proud of the fact, kind of to support some SEL work, we piloted a peer mentoring program at McLaughlin Middle School. Numbers were small. There was only 5 students that participated, but all 5 of those students actually earned an industry certificate in a peer mentoring program with our partners. And our hope is that we can introduce that and push that up into the high school. And just recently, I had a conversation with our director of our Gear Up program, and we think that that might be a good venue for that, where we have the advocates get trained in this process, and we might actually use some of those students that are being supported through Gear Up to maybe introduce district-wide throughout our district into multiple high schools. So that's kind of a highlight as well as a goal moving into next year. So we're excited about that. As far as the program evaluations, I wanted to highlight that usually we identify 3 or 4 areas where we're a little weak or we have opportunity for growth. We've actually had some areas of growth that was kind of surprising to me. And one of those was parent participation. That's always a hard thing, as you know, to get parents to be involved. And this actually was an increase this year, and I was actually surprised. So I questioned our programs and said, "So why is that? I don't understand. It seemed like that may be down in this world." But what they said is that actually through the Zoom and the increased need to make contacts with families in the homes, that they really feel good about making that parental contact. That parents were informed of where students were at, those that were participating. So that's a practice we hope to continue. So we've kind of pushed in and said that that's great, that's good work. Let's not let that go as we move into this next year when we get into more traditional teaching. So that was good. And then always a goal for us to increase industry certifications. And because a lot of those are online and able to access from the distance, we were able to maintain those and actually showed a slight increase. So that was encouraging for us. Also too, so we, as you know, we get designated funding for CTE programs, which is great based on student participation, but we also want to be competitive in the grants world. And just wanted to highlight that we actually got $80,000 this year in competitive OSPI grants to support high wage, high demand programs, which just helps us to leverage funds and get some of that industry grade equipment that sometimes is a little bit out of reach and pricey. We're able to leverage those funds to bring those in. And then we also have leveraged those grants via US Bank grant and Florida Vancouver, some other kind of competitive partner grants, and those are all in direct support of our students to provide work-based learning experiences. So that's, again, another highlight for all the things we do. So talking about the evaluations, taking in all that data from the self-evaluation vetted through our general advisory committee, we've come up with kind of 3 overarching areas that we want to focus into this year. One of those is the work-based learning. We've actually just last board meeting, you approved a contract with Partners in Career. We're going to work with them. We're going to use our partnership person in this office too to offer up to 60 students of paid internship experience this year. We're going to pilot it this summer. And right now, I think we already have 30 students that have applied for placement this summer. So we're vetting businesses and getting them trained up to place them. And then we'll continue that through next year. And again, we really want to make sure that we elevate that learning or extend the learning from the classroom into the workplace. And even better, if we can find a way to leverage funding for our students, because a lot of these kids need that money and they should see the validation of I'm going to earn a wage while I'm doing this work too, instead of just doing it for the credit. But excited about that. We're really looking at it closely to hope that we can replicate and move forward and actually increase the amount of students that are getting those paid work experiences. Safety has been a big one, and I won't get into this too much, but we used a lot of this downtime and the time with teachers and students out of the classrooms to upgrade our classrooms, invested a lot of time and money into equipment, some updating projects, some capital money put into it to do some renovations. And in that, we've also noticed that we want to make sure as we increase the number of labs that we're meeting OSHA and safety regulations. So a lot of the updates have addressed some of that, but we want to bring in a third-party auditor to make sure that we're looking at all of our labs, that the equipment is safe, it's operable, and that we're being mindful of all those kind of things, because we can police ourselves. But again, I think it's better if we can engage some of our community partners to come in to help us evaluate and come up with solutions to make sure that we're providing a safe environment for all of our students. And then finally, the backbone of CTE programs is having strong employers to advise our programs to make sure that the skills that we're teaching and the equipment we're using is relevant. And I feel like that's continually not a problem, but it's hard to get good input. And so one of the things we're going to try to do is elevate that a little bit. So I'm going to try to lean in and see if I can't become part of our community college advisory committees, just to sit in as a K-12 voice to listen to what they're doing and how they're being advised in those conversations, as well as trying to get our high school teachers to be a part of the college advisory committees. Because to me, that makes perfect sense that our local employers would have an audience of our entire pipeline versus just the community college. So when they say there's a need, that we can also hear that too. So how do we supply that base level training so that it can feed into our secondary programs and then into employment? And then I have a whole list of other things, again, just kind of to highlight, even in all of this, we were able to launch new building trades labs at Skyview. So we know when we brought students back, we had students able to participate in that new lab. We have a mechatronics, the automation lab at Columbia River High School. That's in and functioning, and we're really excited to move that into the new facility when that's completed, hopefully in August when we get to move in. We also put in the health sciences labs and had students participate at Hudson's Bay, Skyview, and Columbia River. So again, taking advantage of the empty classrooms to push in all that new equipment, and now finally getting students in there to get their hands on it and do some of that practical application of the work that we make. And I will report, and happy to report, that at the end of this year in our final count, our CTE enrollment and participation was actually up from last year, which is encouraging. So that means our kids stayed enrolled and stayed engaged, which is fantastic. And our forecasting numbers for 21 are even stronger. So we're glad that the word is out that CTE is vibrant and relevant, and students are hopefully being drawn to that, to make sure that, again, our goal is to make sure that students are career and college ready when they leave our programs. So I'm open to field any questions. Again, I would hope that I would have the opportunity to bring forth a more comprehensive report in the fall, but happy to answer any questions.
I just want to make it, this is Kathy and Mark, I just want to say, when you mentioned getting on the board at Clark College, that's all of our community colleges, that's just wonderful. I think I speak for a lot of us on the board that anytime we can have more community input and create a bigger community to retrieve that input and to also be out there so they hear us too is wonderful. That's the way we should be working schools, is investing in community. And thank you so much for making the effort to do that. Plus, it's always great to hear such good news about the things that our students are doing. So thank you.
I appreciate the board's support. This is the end of my year 5, and I've had nothing but support and encouragement from the board. That's appreciated.
I just want to add, I love that the team has found opportunities in COVID to enhance the program. And it's also really nice to see that students stayed engaged and there's continued momentum. When I read this in advance of the meeting, my biggest question was really around how you measure the success of the program, your program evaluation. So I'll be interested to hear the report in the fall, but if there's any of the tools or the forms that you use, because I'm interested kind of on a grander scale, how are we measuring the effectiveness of our programs? It would be interesting, I think, for me at least to see, but maybe for the whole board in a briefing, just what the tools you were to do your self-evaluations.
Yeah, happy to share that.
I think in your program specifically, it's great. It's very accessible to measure the student outcomes because we are training them in a discipline that then they can go forward with. But just as we continue to evaluate programs and student performance, program performance, and student outcomes, it's always interesting, I guess, for me to understand the analysis of how we're self-evaluating. Anyone else have questions or feedback? Thank you for such a detailed kind of update and report. It makes this agenda item, I think, pretty easy for us.
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Okay, so does that move us on to item number 2, which is a recommendation to approve out-of-state travel to Cactus Jam. And Jim can speak to this if there's any questions.
Sure. First of all, Cactus Jam does not go on toast. It's a basketball tournament that's down in Phoenix, Arizona. The Skyview High School basketball team is asking permission to travel to Phoenix, Arizona to compete in the Cactus Jam basketball tournament. There will be approximately 22 teams from all over the United States with a 3-game guarantee. There will also be a team tour of the Arizona State University. Just for the sake of mentioning, they had this trip planned a couple of years ago, and obviously COVID took it away. And the kids essentially raise all the money themselves. Okay, and the parents pay for it too.
Well, that was my only question, Jim, is just from a funding source. It says ASB boosters and student families. I assume there's scholarships available for families that can't support. Okay.
Yeah. In general, during the regular season, most of these are all paid not out of ASB, not paid for out of ASB usually, and then there are scholarship and fundraising opportunities for kids.
So no one will not have access if their family cannot afford part of it.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. That was my only question. Anyone else?
All right, and then we have our recommendation to approve instructional materials for use in 2021 school year. Well, technically it's going to be 21-22 school year. But we have the request for a basic adoption for environmental science, which has definitely been needed. We have all of our students moving through environmental science, and so we want to make sure we have a strong curriculum, and then a basic chemistry adoption, a couple elementary titles, and then a title with some community standards, Michigan versus the boys, to be used in grade 12. So if there are any questions about any of those, I'm happy to provide additional information. Michigan versus the boys is actually really good if anybody has a chance to read it. It's timely and it's a fun read.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to add my school that I work at did a boy called Bat. So it's an elementary school. We did a boy called Bat for our all school read this year, and the kids really liked it. So yeah, there was a lot of positive feedback. So I was glad to see that on there.
Good. Okay. So no questions there. Then we have the request to approve the purchase for a social emotional learning curriculum for K-5. And we're still looking at 6-8. So we're hoping to do a purchase for K-5 and then a pilot for 6-8. With the second step, it's already been approved. It has not been used universally in all schools. And so we want to make sure we're providing that for all schools, that we're providing the most updated version, that we're providing professional development, and so that our teachers have a good resource to help with the support of all of our students for the non-academic needs.
I have a couple questions. So it sounds like, and that was one of my questions, is has it been used already? So it sounds like it is being used, just not across the board.
Correct. In some of our buildings, it's being used.
Yeah, and so I assume in kind of looking at purchasing this universally, that maybe some of the buildings that are using it, like you've gotten their feedback that it is one that they really like and that they think needs to be kind of used universally versus looking at other options.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So what we did is we started actually putting together a multidisciplinary team in February that included folks from a variety of departments, and we put together a training and brought it to our K-12 in March, and we did a follow-up in April, and we provided a plethora of resources for buildings to take, or for principals to take back to their buildings, share with their MTSS teams and their staff members in order to be able to look at a variety of different materials. So Second Step was one of them, PAS was one of them, Ruler was one of them. So we had a variety. And so they went back, they looked at those. Then we, in May, provided a wide range of opportunities for folks to join Zoom sessions about the various, or with the various vendors. And they all did presentations. And so after that, we asked the buildings to vote on which curriculum they think would best meet the needs of their building. And so we had, between first and second choice, we had over 70% of the elementary buildings indicate that second step would be their choice. So the fact that it's already been approved and we already have buildings that are using it, this is a very updated version that, you know, has brought in the equity piece, and it's aligned with our Washington State standards. So we believe that it's a really strong resource, and we can provide really good professional development. And there's also, I've requested, actually, in order to purchase for K-5, it would only be about $135,000, but I've requested additional funds to look into the adult resources as well. So they have an adult program, if you will, that we might want to look into.
Would
as
that be
a,
like
as a resource.
for parents? So like
Or
doing parent coaching or parent support for like their children? That
it's more so for staff, for you know, staff wellness.
Oh, okay. Another question I have, does this include any of the, because I actually, I have gotten some good feedback from school counselors that I work with on this curriculum. So I was glad to see it because I've seen it used in the schools I work at. But I know one of the things that a couple of the convention there are some like additional units that you can purchase. It sounds like maybe separate from the core curriculum. So does this include any of the additional units? Because one of the ones that several people had mentioned to me is there's a child safety one that several counselors said they've really liked using. Or does that include any of the additional ones, or is this just the basic?
Yes, it would. The amount would allow us to make some of those specific, and then there are some resources in Spanish and some kits, additional kits and things that we could purchase as well. And so, yeah, it would just kind of allow us to be able to make some of those additional purchases too.
Okay, great, thank you. That's all. Those are all the questions I had.
Absolutely.
Well, you just answered my first question, which was Spanish language. So thank you.
Yeah, and their resources and their letters to parents and things like that are available in Spanish.
So that would be purchased, I'm assuming, not just for our dual language schools, but all of our schools that have, okay.
Correct.
And then just from again, from an evaluation standpoint, is there structure established to measure the effectiveness of this curriculum?
And that is one of the things we want to provide PD around. So we have a rubric, and we have the standards. And so the Washington State Social Emotional Learning Standards are what we're going to be measuring our evidence of learning and proficiency of standards. So that's what we're going to use to be able to determine whether the program is meeting the needs of our students.
Okay. And then you've touched on professional development. What does that look like going into next school year for the classroom teachers?
The first part of the professional development would be provided by the our second step team. And so they would provide professional development around the program, and then we would continue to provide professional development around how to tie in the standards and the resources and different things that teachers could use, and putting calendars together and how to measure and how to, track the standards and things like that. So we would provide ongoing PD on how to use the program to the strongest fidelity.
Okay. I know some buildings have building specific kind of programs in place. Will this replace that? Like, for instance, 7 steps of a highly effective student. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, those can all still be used. So this is more what we consider like a tier 1, all kids get this particular instructional curriculum. And then the others might be considered like supplemental. So in addition to, so it wouldn't be that they couldn't use them or they didn't fit. Zones of regulation, all those things that buildings are using will still be used. This is more of an instructional program.
How much instructional time? I mean, I know you can't provide exact, but I mean, how much time in the student experience?
It could go anywhere from 30 minutes a week to 30 minutes a day. And then one of the other pieces of it is how to infuse the social emotional learning into your content. Mm-hmm. So, not only teaching explicit lessons, but also how to bring that in to as you're creating those learning experiences for students throughout the content areas and, throughout the experiences during the day out on the playground and all those kinds of things.
Sorry, this will be my last question.
It's okay.
Is there kind of a planned multi-year kind of building professional development building on it? Because it sounds like, just based on the content of the material, and it just sounds very comprehensive, that it might take a few years to fully get it worked into the day-to-day. So it's less individualized lessons, but more kind of incorporated in all the lessons. Is there, I assume this company has continued strategies for professional development?
Yes, and they keep adding. So This is going to be a core component of our multi-tiered systems of support, or our MTSS planning. So this is the kind of the foundational tier. And then as we move through, this will be a key component of that structure.
Yeah, it just seems like it's a great tool, but just making sure everyone knows how to use it effectively, to get the most impact. Well, thank you for answering all my questions. Anyone else, Sandra or Kathy?
Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, well, thank you. I think, Kathy, it's Superintendent's report.
Yeah, we have 2 reports tonight. First up, we have a budget report with Brett Blechschmidt, our Chief Operating Officer. So, Brett, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Kathy. And I'm going to invite, I see Dr. Snell is connected. I'm not sure if he's totally able to engage, depending on other obligations, but hopefully he can shed some light if I get over my skis here a little bit, because he's helped prepare a lot of this information and organize it as we've been scrambling to get this project put together. So with that, I'll go ahead and launch into the slides. So kind of our agenda for this particular superintendent's report is we want to provide kind of that overview of where we're at with the ESSER funded strategies that we're recommending going forward. We want to provide some opportunity for that feedback, share the feedback that we've already gotten in terms of our internal deliberations, as well as our solicitation to our broader staff via survey. And then we'll conclude with just kind of the board's reaction to those recommendations and that data set. So as we've alluded to, there's a couple different resources that we will be able to share some of the staff survey. I think you've gotten even a deeper dive on the staff survey data. and the proposals themselves, which are, as you know, numerous. So we'll be dealing with them in kind of a summary level based on categories and types of expenditures that summarize those 90 odd proposals or components of proposals that we've gathered. So our outcomes, as I kind of alluded to, is we want to make sure we have a common understanding of what the ESSER funding and constraints are, opportunities and constraints. Certainly want to hear from the board kind of that reaction and make sure that we're on the same page in terms of the categories that we're tracking and the outcomes associated with that. And then again, as we alluded to, the feedback loop with the board at the conclusion of all of this sharing. So from an overview perspective, what we're looking at, and you'll see, so I think a slide in a minute on kind of challenges and opportunities, but just to kind of lay the groundwork for the work ahead of us is we have a 2-year window, as we've shared in the past. All of these funds must be spent and claimed by September 2023. So we've gone through the brainstorming and kind of needs identification process with both district leadership, reaching out to school leadership partners to make sure that we have as broad of perspective as we practically could in the limited time, and knowing, again, even with that, we were still sorting through 90 some elements of proposals or component parts of proposals. So we have a short period of time, unfortunately, to mobilize, as we'll highlight in a minute, but we're trying to succinctly gather that input from a broad perspective of leaders. As I alluded to, we did do the survey, so we sought some staff feedback at kind of a high level categories that we were seeing emerge and the themes that we were seeing emerge in those proposals. And then the process will allow us to possibly refine the proposals as we get closer to actually operationalizing strategies and plans. So as you might remember from, I think, a superintendent report at a board meeting a month or 2 ago, we went through the actual categories of expenses that are allowed per the congressional appropriation language right in the ESSER bills. What we've tried to do, though, since some of that's kind of cryptic and some of it's a little bit far afield in terms of, you know, public health and some of those categories, which aren't necessarily really easy for people to kind of think about, and really we may not even have priority needs in. So what we did is we tried to organize some things into categories that, number one, aligned with the proposals that we were seeing, but gave us a efficient platform for that staff feedback and obviously future communications with stakeholders. And so the categories that kind of aligned with and maybe succinctly organized the ESSER allowable categories into things that allow us to talk about things the way we talk about things. We had a category for in-school learning support, and again, in the survey, we offered some examples. This isn't an inclusive list of examples. This is just a few samples to kind of help people understand what that might look like. I won't read each one of them because I think you've seen this. So we had in-school learning support. We had social emotional learning support with, again, some examples. And then learning environment support is kind of a category that we used as we knew that there was a lot of needs and opportunities around technology, and then the ESSER funds also allow for air quality and ventilation improvements. And so then we had some other proposals that seemed to fit more in that kind of environmental conditions type categories. So we've lumped those into that. And then we also had out of school learning support. So obviously those would be things that happen outside the bell schedule of school, but we still hope to be able to access students and staff to meet the needs that have emerged as a result of COVID and the disruptions of the learning environments this past year and a half. Professional learning support, or PD, is obviously embedded in a lot of these strategies, and so we've tried to kind of categorize those around how we can achieve some gains through just very intentional work and supporting educators in that work. And then there's a category for technology enhanced learning supports. And so you can kind of see those are not necessarily just the underlying technological environment, but these are about devices and in more direct contact types, tools and resources. So as I alluded to earlier, there are some great opportunities with this particular resource that's kind of been provided for us at just the time we need it the most. However, there are some challenges, and one is we're having these discussions and we've gathered the feedback that we've gathered in probably a little more than a month's time. And we're really up against the gun if we're going to be able to deploy some of these strategies as early as late summer, fall to meet the students as they come back to school and start to think about dealing with the problems that we've had to endure over the last year and a half. Another significant challenge that we have to be mindful of is the sustainability. So you'll see in a future slide that there's a breakdown between staffing and kind of other more traditionally one-time things. With those staffing elements, some of them, they kind of sunset naturally and they have a very specific timeline and deliverable, and then it's pretty easy to sunset. Other ones are going to be a challenge to have those sustainability conversations once the funding is in essence gone and the spending window or the availability of the funds is no longer available. Again, I won't necessarily read verbatim all of these, but obviously we want to be mindful of the things that we've learned and how we can best meet our kids' needs in the coming years. Need an alignment of resources, and then obviously the last one, which is a big one, but it's going to be a tricky one, is we're kind of building these things on the fly, as we do want to make sure we're stopping and asking ourselves, how are we going to know if this met the need or delivered on the outcomes we were hoping for. So to kind of frame what we understand to be your priorities and your role in this is we do understand that there's kind of some broad decision-making considerations that have already emerged in previous work and discussion. One would be to maintain that focus on student experience. We know that there's external stakeholder interest as well as internal stakeholder interest in having the in-person learning experiences for our kids. However, we're certainly going to continue to be very mindful and diligent on those public health guidance and standards, which will allow us to minimize the risk to students and staff. We're aware that it might look a little different next year, but there's a need likely, and we're certainly planning to have that fully remote as well as fully in-person options for students. Keeping in, I know we have another superintendent report right after this around some of the equity work. So certainly don't want to do that in a vacuum. So we're keeping that equity eye and focus as we're processing these ideas and thoughts and administering this work. Flexibility is going to be important for a lot of the reasons we've already highlighted. Number one, the needs might be emergent and we might have to shift a little bit once we have a better understanding of what the needs are. We certainly also have to be adaptive in terms of how we're going to sunset or replace certain services that are funded only for the duration of the grant or possibly even the first year of the grant. We want to minimize transitions. We've heard that loud and clear. We want to try as best we possibly can to kind of lock in on some routines and some schedules and let people kind of thrive in that stability that was so lacking over the last year, certainly, and really into the previous year. As I alluded to with that innovation slide earlier, we know some things now that we didn't know before the challenges that we've been confronted from. So let's not forget those, and let's be mindful of the things that have worked well and make sure that we integrate those into the strategies going forward. And then lastly, what we understand of your priorities and your accountability to us is make sure that there's that engagement in both planning and delivery and communication of these programs and strategies, so that people can understand, appreciate, and most importantly, take advantage of the resources that will be made available. So one way we kind of wanted to frame the feedback loop, and again, we'll continue to share information, and then we'll just kind of go back to this anchor, is of all of those categories of expenses that we've already covered and all the micro level recommendations and ideas, really we think one of the main frames that we can get some real meaningful feedback from you all on is, do we have the right distribution between that kind of technology learning environment, types of interventions and strategies versus the staffing, the hourly per services? You know, again, I guess it could be considered to be direct experiences or opportunities versus those indirect type benefits that we can deliver through these projects. So you'll see some statistics down the road, but that's kind of one of the ways that we're going to frame the data if you want to kind of think in those terms. So since we did already gather the staff feedback, and I know you've seen some of this, but we wanted to just refresh everybody's memory on how we ask our staff, knowing that they're busy and they didn't have time to go through every category, and we really didn't want to get into, well, I have a special interest here. So we wanted to stay at that conceptual level. And so we, again, have those categories that I outlined earlier. You can see that there wasn't a wide range between the most popular, the most favored category versus the lowest response to a category. They're pretty tightly packed when you look at the top and the bottom, but the top one that rose out of the survey was that in-school supports for students. And so that certainly is something that we've tried to integrate into our further processing and recommendations. Social emotional, as you can see, was second. Learning environment, which again includes some technology infrastructure as well as some of those other things, scored kind of right in, well, a little bit above the middle point. And then we had the out of school supports, those summer and after school type opportunities, professional development, and technology, as you can see. Again, not a great disparity between the top and the bottom there. This is just a way I think that Jeff was good enough to kind of organize, and I think, and I don't know if he wants to jump in if he's available, but I think his point was there's kind of a couple of them that kind of sit in one tier, and then there's maybe a second tier that was a little bit lower in terms of the deviation between 8.1 and 7.8 down to 7. And then there's another group that's a little more compact. And then there's third group, or fourth group, excuse me. And again, I'll pause just in case. And again, I don't want to put him on the spot if he's not available, but if Jeff's available, I don't know if there was another point you wanted to make on this, or if it was just a way of organizing those feedback.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Basically, the categories that are in the blue are more of that direct service kind of, if you think about like an experience that a student might be able to go home and talk about, like I worked on this, versus the green is maybe more of that infrastructure that students wouldn't necessarily recognize that the HVAC has been updated, or there's a new Chromebook or something like that. So just trying to think at a board level, like how can we capture the direction that you've already given us and organizing these proposals in a way that kind of helps inform you without going line item by line item. Again, tonight we're looking for like overall feedback. Of course, if we make expenditures around the programming or anything like that, we're going to be coming to the board, you know, when those hit a certain threshold as well. But there's also all these little proposals that we think could have a big impact on students, and we want to start moving forward on them. So.
Thank you very much, Jeff. If the audience hasn't figured out, somehow I managed to upwardly delegate to the guy that's probably the busiest in the state of Washington education system, but Jeff was good enough to kind of prepare these slides and help organize all of this massive body of data that we had. So I'm glad you were able to come in and do justice to your work, since I kind of butchered what you were what you were speaking to here. So I'll try to, hopefully I don't need to pause because you can jump in on any other slide, but I'll try to at least slow down enough so you can correct what I've misrepresented potentially.
Yeah, and so you see on this, it's pulling those blue categories of direct service and the green categories of more indirect service. And then if you can click forward again, Brett. So this is when we looked at those proposals, about 65% of the proposals fell into that student learning experience category, and about 35% fell into technology and learning environment. I also want to highlight that there isn't a proposal potentially that doesn't affect both. It's really hard to separate those out sometimes, because you could say that, you know, having better technology could directly improve the student experience. So, but just at a high level, trying to organize these and make some sense, and then also trying to invest accordingly to some of the direction you've given us about infrastructure and support, and using these one-time funds to really position the district in a good way to take advantage of what we've learned, and also to respond to student needs. So you can go ahead, Brett.
All right, keep going. You're on a roll.
I'll just keep going. So within, Brett showed those two ways to think about this. And so the other way that we're thinking about it is the direct services versus professional training. Because again, you know, if we put staff through, and Darcy presented about the social emotional curriculum, and so if we do some training and we pay for that out of ESSER funds, is it going to enhance the student's experience? Yes, and we hope so. But it's not necessarily something that students are involved in the process. So the breakdown of those 65% of the proposals, 85% were directly linked to students in an activity, and about 15% were related to professional training. And then further kind of looking at those proposals within the staffing kinds of categories, about 39% of them, almost 40%, are like our positions. We potentially would need to hire a new position or present an opportunity for somebody to move into that kind of a position. And then about 10% of those are more like almost we could add to some existing employees, or see if somebody wants to participate in an after-school program and be paid hourly, or potentially contract that out to partners, you know, such as, like, we already have partnerships with the Boys and Girls Clubs and groups like that could provide services. On the supplies side of things, infrastructure, really about half of the proposal categories were more in that kind of a line. Just some examples. You know, we didn't want to list out 90 some. We know that the budget committees had a chance to review these more in depth. But these are the kinds of services that were generated through the brainstorming and looking at student need and trying to respond appropriately. These are the kinds of ideas that came up, and you can see it's everything from looking at our HVAC and to, you know, a credit recovery option for students. And the other thing that there will probably be some capacity in this to respond to needs, as Brett said, as they emerge, because we can provide these opportunities for students, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all the students are going to want those opportunities. And so we're trying to staff what we think the need is, and then we'll have to reassess once the students come. And so there could be greater capacity on the back end to do the next level of services. So that's an important thing to consider as well. I'll pause on this to see if there are any questions, as we've been giving you a lot of content. And remember, we do have a slide at the end kind of just for board discussion, but specifically about these kinds of needs and outcomes. Are there questions?
So, and this may be too detailed oriented, but so we're on it when it says engagement opportunities for students to reconnect and continue with learning forever from wherever the starting point is. Are we talking about after the school year starts? Are we talking like weeks before, like having them come in a little bit earlier? I'm just wanting to figure out the timing of that one.
Yes. The range of proposals were, you know, summer programming, out of school time programming, and in school time programming. So when you see a bullet item like that, it is pretty all encompassing for different creative ways to try to connect with kids.
All right, I like that. I love different creative ways to connect with kids. That sounds awesome. Thanks.
Okay, Brett, maybe keep going then. And the one slide that I wanted to include is just our state's social emotional learning framework really encompasses a lot of the proposals and a lot of the conversations that we're having. And so just to reorient the board, you know, this is a framework that our state is moving forward with. So when we say SEL, we're also talking about equity, culture, responsiveness, universal design, trauma-informed practices per the state. And so the nice thing about a lot of these proposals is there's some alignment there. And I think our job as district leaders is to help our staff see that alignment, to help utilize that alignment to really be pulling in the same direction and really create great experiences for our students. So we'll often probably anchor in this, especially as we've adopted a SEL curriculum for all of our classrooms. Like, what does this mean for trauma-informed practice across the K-12 system? So it's just kind of an anchor slide. You'll probably get tired of it over the course of the year. So go ahead, Brett. Here's some more sample proposals specifically. So just starting to get a little more detailed, Kathy, to your question. So when we talk about re-engagement, it could be advocates. And we've had some specific examples of success with that. And maybe there are some creative ways to do that. Looking at our FCRCs and the critical role that they played in supporting families in the last 18 months and before that, but what does the next iteration of this look like and what are the needs? So really looking at the staffing model, looking at the support there and you know, making sure it has the resources it needs. Lots of proposals related to special services and program support, and recognizing that some of our students have not been able to engage as consistently. And so looking at like psych time and you know, different support structures that could be needed, and we need to plan for it, and we want to make sure that we're ready to respond. Early learning support, so you know, looking at our models and where can we grab kids and really kind of catch them up a little bit with experiences maybe that typically in a year that they would have, and we haven't been able to deliver that. Another thing that we didn't necessarily see specifically in all the proposals, but in some of our other surveys of staff, they've talked about the ability to work with smaller groups of students this year has been really important to the work. And not knowing exactly what our enrollment looks like next year, setting aside some of those dollars to make sure that our class sizes are manageable, make sure that we have the flexibility to grow if we need to quickly. And so there's some funding in there to see who shows up, you know, on the first day of school and adjust accordingly. So go ahead to the next slide, Brett. So in order to make all this happen, you know, at some level, we need to get contracts like to do HVAC kinds of work, or to potentially have partners help us with after school programming or summer programming. We also need to post positions and offer opportunities for people to work additional hours, and there's a process to that. Just the purchasing process, all of that. We want to have whatever funded proposal that we work through, we want to have some sort of assigned lead so that we can report back to the board around some outcomes. You know, we have an obligation. Number one, we're grateful for these resources. These are taxpayer dollars, and so we want to make sure that we have a way of, as Brett said earlier, tracking like the impact of these dollars. And also, you know, we potentially have tough decisions when the funding runs out on if it's something is really working for kids, and we want to know that and be able to potentially sustain that in some way. So having the leads around the proposals will be a good way of kind of getting that feedback back to you as a board and to us collectively to make decisions moving forward. reasonably, to do all the first 3 bullets is going to take a lot of effort, and then we'll probably have to pause and kind of talk about timelines related to goals and progress monitoring. And so that would be a next step as well, in working with in partnership with you. And so I guess what we wanted to do tonight is just provide some capacity for you to ask some questions, to have some discussion about the process that we went through. It's a rare opportunity to have this kind of a stimulus kind of relief funding package. So there isn't necessarily a roadmap on how to do this. And then when you're trying to finish a school year that's been pretty topsy-turvy at best, in terms of just asking staff a lot, and so then to weigh in on these kinds of decisions and what students need is pretty challenging too. So we're curious about the process. We're curious about how we've broken down the distribution of funding for you, and if you feel like that reflects the feedback that we previously received. And then we're also curious if you have any other ideas on next steps. I'll pause there, Brett, if you have anything else to add, and then we'll just kind of open it up for board discussion.
No, I think that's a great tee up. Thank you. And again, thanks for providing much better context. I should have gone to the bullpen for a relief pitcher a lot earlier in this presentation.
Thank you both for, I feel like the directors might need a second to unpack all that you've shared with us. It's a lot. I just want to share with the other directors on the call right now, or on the meeting right now. Director Smith and I have had a deep dive in our budget committee session, so that has happened. And I just want to thank you both for synthesizing kind of some of that detail, that granular detail, and making it a bit digestible. So I want to open it up to questions and comments from the directors. And if we need to go back to any of the slides where we've prioritized categories, let us know. I'm just going to say the piece that I see that's evolved from our budget committee meeting, one is the refinement of those proposals. There was some overlap, so I appreciated just kind of the synthesis of that. But adding the piece of tracking outcomes, that's going to be really important, just accountability to that money, but also how we learn from these investment decisions moving forward. So I appreciate the attention there. I agree with how you've broken down the categories of the infrastructure versus student experience. That felt comfortable to me. I'd love, maybe just going back to that slide specifically, we can get feedback from the other directors, but that felt pretty comfortable to me. My personal priority is really not getting ourselves into a position with too many of these proposals that we cannot sustain when this is one-time money. So making sure that this is investment in opportunities, but not necessarily obligating us into things that we would have to turn off in 3 years.
Yeah, I think that's my biggest, when I look at all of these things, that sustainability lens, because it is one-time money. So I think I'm glad you hit on that, in terms of there might be things that we do feel like are worth a more long-term investment, but then we have to figure out where the funding is coming from, since this is one-time funding. So, we could throw a lot of money at hiring staff towards something, but then at some point that money is not continuing. And so then, I mean, we could get ourselves into kind of some difficult situations if we're really not kind of carefully considering where we're using the money. So I think this is great how you've broken it down.
And I agree. I love how this has been broken down. And some of that money is obviously not, you won't have to reuse it. I mean, obviously the professional training to provide certain services, once that's done, it's done. It's not yes, sometimes we have to continue and learn new things, but it's in a different ilk. So, and then some of the other things, maybe investments in materials to help with the direct services. So there's some things that are naturally not needing reinvestment. It mostly comes down to if we have to, if not have to, but if we have the honor of investing in new staff, then that becomes the where we should pause and say, so is that staffing sustainable? Whereas the materials and the training, those are often just one-time investments. But this really does help break it down. And I appreciate, Jeff, you mentioning that the green isn't necessarily completely removed from the blue and vice versa. That, you know, obviously we've learned that technology is related to the direct services for our kids. And for some of our kids, it turned out to be a positive for them to have all of that technology. So I appreciate you saying, well, this is the breakdown. It's not as cut and dry as it looked.
I just have to agree with everyone. I think I'm just really impressed with everything that's been presented to us, and also just how we've been able to kind of narrow it down. And I think the fact that it really is, the focus is our students and how we can best meet their needs. Yeah, I feel like I feel the same way with everyone. The concerns also about staffing and being able to maintain it, because this is only temporary. I think it's great that we have the opportunity. But I think also positive that I've been noticing is that it's kind of like a pattern. You know, I think right now the social emotional learning is kind of the focus, and I think also looking at how we can prioritize that in, I think, an all-encompassing and technology and equity. And so I find that so interesting, just how really it encompasses everything.
One of the things that we heard too in reviewing these proposals from previous conversations with the board is that, to build on your response, Sandra, is that the student experience has been dramatically altered over the last 18 months. And so investing in hopefully opportunities that are joyful for kids and build their curiosity. I think you saw some of the summer programming that Deborah, I think, and others shared at a previous board member and really a board meeting, really trying to make it fun for kids, like be in each other's space a little bit and enjoy. Boy, we've had some, over the pandemic, we've had some opened new buildings and facilities that we haven't had a chance to really stretch it out in and really utilize. And so there's all these opportunities. So it is a fine line because to create those experiences, you do need great people to help facilitate them. And a lot of those positions, even though they are direct services, are going to be outside of the school day, outside of the normal school year. So it isn't as difficult as like adding directly to the school day services. When we add directly to the school day services, those ones do, ultimately are sustained by the prototypical school funding model. And if you get too far outside of that model, then you've got to use your local levy to support that. And you can start to get running towards a cliff if you do too much of that. So I think Brett and the team are really mindful of that. Our principals, with the leadership of Jim and Deborah, have done a great job of coming up with some ideas. And so we're excited to kind of start moving forward on it. And then we also want to loop back probably in the planning session with you about looking in August, like how do we scale this out? So if we want to talk about summer programming and an impact, then perhaps October is a good time to update the board on what we're seeing. If we're talking about credit recovery, how are those students doing in high school, and how many credits are we deficient overall as a system, and what can we do about that? And maybe that's a good topic around the semester. And so just kind of laying out some of this so that you feel like you have some accountability for how these funds have been distributed, and hopefully the amazing impact they've had on students.
I really appreciate that. Just a consideration of maybe a year-long calendar of how we're evaluating this investment. I think that will be helpful for the board. One thing and I just want to go back to it, I forgot to mention previously when I was speaking, Jeff, you had talked about class size and enrollment for next year, and I absolutely stand behind sustainability, so I don't want to get ourselves into a situation. However, we have gotten a lot of feedback just around some of the smaller class sizes, or how remote students were pulled out, for instance, and then classroom teachers have had less students and they've been able to create a bigger impact perhaps. So, as that becomes available for next year, I do think that student teacher ratios year one post-COVID might be really beneficial. I also wanted, I sit on as the board director for the foundation board, and in their last meeting wrapping up this year, just reiterating the amount of community partnerships we have. The real main theme to the meeting was about how our school system is going to re-engage next year, and what our supports and our community partners can do to support that process. So I know that we already do, but let's leverage those partnerships, and so many hardworking people inside the district, but also outside the district, that are helping our students.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people, I think, I wasn't at Kyle's meeting, but I know that there are a lot of community members who are reaching out and saying, what can we do now? What's the next step? And we should grab them up and rope them in while the iron is hot. And I just mixed a whole lot of metaphors there together, but let's bring them in. And even if we only have a little bit right now, we could just say, yes, come and sort this and come and do this, because, they'll find something else to fill that spot, to fill that need to contribute back. So we got to jump on them and get them working for us.
And we're very fortunate to have structures like FCRCs that allow people to come in, because sometimes in organizations, it's hard to know how to help. And it's hard to find ways to harness that collective power. And so we have those structures in place on that kind of level of support. And then we have already great partnerships, like I mentioned, with Boys and Girls Club and shared spaces. And so those are really great opportunities to use these funds. And so definitely we're using that lens as we look through this. I know Mark has met with some possible partners around some mentoring programs. And so we feel like it's a huge opportunity that we don't want to miss. And so we're trying to be really thoughtful about this initial round. We also want to be really thoughtful in setting us up for next year at this time, so that we know what worked and what didn't work, and how we're going to reinvest for the second year cycle of this. So, and then we'll be setting up for the third year, when we're trying to make some, hopefully it is kind of difficult decisions. Like, hopefully we found a lot of programs that really work for kids, and, we're having to kind of figure that out. The other thing with some of these proposals is we've talked about, like, already, let's make it ready so that somebody could fund this if they were interested. If there is a mentoring program and we can show it works, it doesn't necessarily have to be Vancouver general ed dollars to make that happen. It could be foundation dollars or other kinds of dollars that are out there of people that really want to make an impact.
That's how we fund our night preschools, is somebody donated some funds because they saw that it was a program that really worked and they wanted to make an impact. So those are some great programs that we can get funded through people who really want to contribute. The only other comment I want to make is that it looks like there's a lot of planning in a lot of people to be on a lot of people's calendars for this summer. Man, that's a lot to get done.
Yeah, the biggest concern I have is hiring for some of these positions. You guys asked earlier about some of the PD related to SEL. Like, we need to be really thoughtful about a scope and sequence for professional learning. And, you know, there's only so much time in a day, and we want our staff focused on students and preparing for the school year. So how do we layer that in? What's our longer vision? I guess our through line for professional learning. And so the other piece that's been challenging is, and want to just compliment Kathy and Brett and everybody else, is, you know, that I'm showing up every once in a while, and we've got people that are retiring, and we've got new people coming on board. And so we really want to engage a lot of voices in this, and we also need to make some decisions because it's not in students' best interest to just say, oh, we'll wait and figure this out in the fall. Like, every day there's an opportunity. So we want to take advantage of that. And we'll have some misses on this too. I think it's important to acknowledge that we'll probably start some of these proposals and it won't work out quite how we intended through nobody's fault, but it's just like it might not align with the need that we thought was there. And so we do need to give staff some grace around that. And you know, I think honestly, if we don't have failure, we probably aren't trying to innovate enough or push ourselves enough to kind of see what could be. And maybe a little too safe on it. So there's definitely some reaching on this. And then there's also some tried and true things that we know, you know, just for fact that kids are going to need this and we need to provide it. So I really appreciate the feedback from the board. You know, it can be ongoing, and you're probably going to see some proposals that start to show up that are related to this funding as they hit the board level threshold for approval, that kind of thing. So
did you get sufficient feedback from the board?
I think so. Brett, Kathy, do you guys have any questions?
No, I think that was good. I appreciate, again, Jeff has done amazing work in weekends and nights and everything, helping to kind of get us to this place. And so just want to make sure that's clearly understood, that the vision that you saw is very much a product of a lot of hard work on his part. So thank you for that. And I think that's the vision we'll continue to chase then based on this feedback.
And I just want to remind to the directors, they are moving very quickly. As your questions come up, be sure to ask, just send me an email. We'll get it in the next briefing, and we'll continue to stay updated that way. So it can be a fluid kind of process. Okay.
Okay, if we are no more questions from our directors, we will move forward with our next superintendent presentation. And again, Brett and Jeff, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate that. Very informative. Took a lot of information and put that into bite-sized nuggets that we can all digest and move forward with. So our next topic is around our equity audit update, and our Chief Equity Officer, Janelle Ephraim, is here to kind of give us some highlights of where we currently are at and where we're going to be going. So Janelle.
All right, thank you. Jefferson, can you share the slideshow? Awesome, you can go to the next slide. So I just want to, thank you for giving me the opportunity to give you an update this evening. Largely this year with our equity initiative, it's largely focused on operationalizing our discipline equity work, as well as engaging our stakeholders. And so as part of our discipline equity work, we've had an equity audit, and our equity advisory committee has been pretty instrumental in that whole process. They helped us to select the consulting company that delivered the services for us. I just want to share a little bit about the audit with you. Next slide, please. All right, so our auditors examined numerous things in our system. They looked at culture and climate, instructional policy and practices, curriculum around our literacy, math, and SEL. We've talked a lot about that this evening. Leadership readiness to address systematic racism. They also looked at our data, that's achievement data, as well as fiscal data and our human resource practices. I talked about on that last slide how we focus largely on engagement. And so we've engaged our stakeholders with our culture and climate survey. All students from 5th through 12th grade had an opportunity to participate in that. And that survey had some specific questions around equity and how our system is responding to our student and family needs. One of the highlights of our survey was that when in respect to parent participation, we had over half of our parents who participated in the survey identify as parents of color. So I think we had a nice representation, and it was aligned with our student population. Okay. Families and staff, as well as students, also had an opportunity to engage in interviews, focus groups, and listening sessions. Next slide. So the key recommendations that came out of the audit, there were 5 key recommendations. The first one was for us to develop a culture of equity. And one example of that could include adopting an equity lens. And the reason I say could include is because as we create a plan, we want to make sure that it's a plan that is created collaboratively with our community. And so engaging our community is a huge part of our next steps. When we look at number 2, identifying equity goals, objectives, and a racial equity theory of action, we're going to be looking at short-term goals as well as long-term goals. And so our short-term goals are going to be able to be those things that we can apply immediately after receiving feedback. But our long-term plan is really for this work to inform our strategic plan. Our third one is to build internal capacity. That could include professional development, and we talked a lot about that earlier in Jeff and Brett's presentation. The fourth one is adopt a more equitable versus equal funding formula. One example of that could include providing building leaders with more autonomy around how they spend resources so that it's aligned with the needs, particularly of students in their building. And the fifth one, plan for the known and unknown complexities of managing change as VPS clarifies its vision for the future. Again, this is largely about engaging our community in shared decision-making. Next slide. Oops, next slide, please. So our stakeholder engagement, we've started to share this information with many of our stakeholder groups already. Our Equity Advisory Committee had the opportunity to engage in Zoom as well as in-person opportunities to look deep into the audit findings, and as we start to solicit feedback for creating a plan. Summer engagement will include some opportunities for community members to engage in Zoom, but also our students, families, as well as community members will have access to the audit findings on our school district website. And so that information will be posted on Monday, and along with the audit information, folks will have the opportunity to give feedback as far as what are some ways that they believe that these recommendations can be enacted in our plan. And then fall engagement, that will capitalize on the fact that our students are returning to school. So we'll have an opportunity to engage our students in this work because of course it all touches them. And so we really want to make sure that that they have a strong voice in decision making as well. Next slide. So the question that we are really looking at, that we will that everyone will have an opportunity to participate in is what might implementation of the recommendations look like. So we really want to hear from all stakeholders who are interested in engaging so that we can make sure that we're responding to the needs of our entire community. Are there any questions?
I don't have a question, but I just want to thank you for all the work that you're doing, kind of leading this. It's really nice to see that throughout this whole process, it really has been a community effort and a community, there's been so much community engagement. And I just liked even seeing how, you know, that, like you said, next week, like the findings are going to come out to the community and then they can also give feedback then. So it wasn't just the feedback earlier in the process, but even on like next steps. I just think that's really refreshing. And really, I think that's going to give us a lot of buy-in from our community because it's not just a district developed plan or administrative plan or you know, staff plan. It really is, you know, students and parents and just all throughout the community. So thank you for including all of those steps.
Thank you.
I'm excited to hear from you what you want the board, how you want the board to interact and what you want the board to be doing. Because this sounds like such exciting and also nerve-wracking work to be done, but it's one that will make such a great impact on so many of our students. And so tell us what you want us to do.
Well, I have to say that the board has you know, led the work with the resolution that that was announced in the fall, and I know that you all are planning on delivering a equity policy, and so I think those are really instrumental pieces in moving this work forward in our system for our community. So thank you.
I was going to ask Janelle similar, is just really how does the board continue you know, supporting your work and driving this at a policy level. So, you know, I think there's probably going to be a future opportunity to work, maybe, you know, we can have a workshop of you and the directors to really kind of talk through at the policy level what we want to be doing that can best support the work of you, but the entire district team that's really responsible. So I also want to echo, I am so glad to see the priority towards community engagement. I think there's a lot of conversation around equity. There's a lot of misinformation around equity right now. And just the more transparent and the more opportunity we give for our constituents to engage, I think that'll be better. And to Tracy's point, get better buy-in. So thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say, I think we already talked to now, but I'm really excited about this work. But I hope also that if and when we also have these trainings, that we as the board are also able to attend. Because I think even though I think we're all very much with understanding a lot of equity work, that I think we're also here to grow and to learn more. And so I hope that's also part of this, because I also want to be able to grow and learn with our district and our community.
Thank you.
I have one quick question, Janelle, and that is, since I've served on the Equity Discipline Committee, I'm having a hard time figuring out how these two are going to merge or be different, or it seems like so much of the same work. And I'm curious as to if you have a vision for how that's all going to come together.
Well, I agree that it is essentially the same work. I believe that the Discipline Equity Committee was formed in response for, you know, because of the our work with, you know, the UCLA Center for Civil Rights Remedies. And so I believe that that's a conversation that that we should have as committees, you know, looking at because part of it has to do with commitment and people's capacity. So I'm certainly open to having conversations about how these committees can work together.
Sounds great. Thanks.
I just want to lastly add, I think everything you're doing is so great, and just putting a plug into making sure we're communicating out in multiple channels, because we know that not all of our families are reading, you know, the emails, just making sure that we're approaching our school communities and our parents and our students through multiple vehicles, translations, etc., just to make sure everybody understands and has access to the work we're doing.
Yeah, that brings up a good point. So Janelle, I think you said on Monday, the information is going to get posted to the website and parents can give feedback. Is that then, I assume there'll be some communication through email, through like VPS this week? I mean, how will people know that that information is on the website?
There'll be an alert that goes out. So it will either be through VPS this week or an email to all of our families and staff.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
So that concludes our meeting tonight. Thank you all for participating. Just as a reminder, our next meeting is July 13th at the Bates Center. It's a regular board meeting. We'll be acting on the agenda items we reviewed tonight. Community comment, you can look at the website to sign up for citizens comment. Without further ado, though, we are adjourned.